The air smelled of fresh roses and vanilla-scented candles, their fragrance mingling with the crisp autumn breeze that drifted through the grand cathedral's open doors. Sienna Cole inhaled deeply, steadying her heartbeat as she stood at the entrance, gripping the bouquet in her trembling hands. This was it. Her wedding day. Her lace-trimmed veil cascaded down her back, the delicate fabric brushing against her bare shoulders. A shimmering white gown hugged her body, the intricate embroidery glistening beneath the golden glow of the cathedral's chandeliers. Everything about this moment should have felt magical. Perfect. But a strange unease curled in her stomach, cold and unshakable. "You ready, sweetheart?" her father, Charles Cole, murmured beside her, his strong arm linked with hers. She turned to meet his gaze, deep-set eyes filled with pride but shadowed with concern. She knew what he was thinking. That she could still turn back. That she didn't have to marry Roman Sinclair, a man with a reputation for being ruthless, calculating, and dangerously enigmatic. But it was too late for doubts. She had made her choice. Sienna nodded, offering her father a small, reassuring smile. "I'm ready." The cathedral doors swung open. A soft melody from the grand piano filled the air, and all heads turned toward her. Hundreds of guests, dressed in their finest attire, sat in hushed anticipation. Powerful figures, business moguls, politicians, and socialites had all gathered to witness the union of two of the wealthiest families in the country. Her gaze swept past them, searching for him. And there he was. Roman Sinclair stood at the far end of the aisle, his presence commanding, his broad shoulders rigid beneath the tailored black tuxedo. His dark hair was combed back in its usual immaculate style, and his chiseled jaw remained as sharp as ever. Even from across the room, his steel-gray eyes locked onto hers. Intense. Piercing. Her pulse quickened. He looked breathtakingly handsome, but more than that, he looked like hers. For all his coldness, for all the secrets he never quite revealed, she had seen something behind those guarded eyes. A flicker of warmth, of longing, of something real beneath the fortress he had built around himself. Sienna took her first step forward, then froze. Her breath hitched in her throat. Standing beside Roman was another man. Not the priest. Not his best man. Another Roman. Her heart stuttered violently against her ribs. Two identical men stood at the altar, both dressed in the same tuxedo. Both with the same strong jawline, the same hauntingly beautiful gray eyes. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered her name. Her bouquet slipped from her fingers, hitting the marble floor with a soft thud. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she took an unsteady step forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Roman?" The Roman on the left smirked. "Hello, darling." The Roman on the right clenched his jaw, his muscles tightening. "Sienna, don't listen to him." His voice was calm but edged with something deadly. "He's lying." More murmurs. More gasps. Ethan Ward, Roman's best friend and business partner, shot up from his seat in the front row. "What the hell is going on?" Neither Roman answered. Sienna's father took a protective step toward her, his voice sharp. "Which one of you is my daughter marrying?" The Roman on the left, smirking Roman as her dazed mind had labeled him, adjusted the cuffs of his tuxedo, looking completely unbothered. "I am Roman Sinclair." The other one, serious Roman, narrowed his eyes. "No, I am." A cold chill skated down her spine. One of them was lying. But which one? Smirking Roman stepped closer, his gaze locked onto hers. "Sienna, you know me. Look into my eyes." Sienna's breath caught. It was him. The man she had spent late nights with, the man who had whispered confessions against her skin. Wasn't it? Her stomach twisted. Serious Roman's voice was low but firm. "You have to trust me." Her world spun. She felt dizzy, untethered, like she was trapped in a nightmare. "Roman," she said again, her voice trembling. "Tell me something only you would know." Serious Roman inhaled sharply. "The night we first kissed, you were wearing a green dress. You smelled like jasmine and rain. You told me you had never met someone who made you feel completely alive." Her breath hitched. That was true. She turned to smirking Roman. His smirk deepened. That's cute, he murmured. But let me ask you this, Sienna. How do you know he's not the imposter? A shiver crawled down her spine. She didn't. The realization hit her like a freight train. She didn't know. She had spent months falling for Roman Sinclair, yet now, standing here, staring at two identical versions of him, she couldn't tell which one was real. Serious Roman turned to Ethan, his jaw set. You know it's me. Ethan's face was ghostly pale. I don't know what to say. You're lying, smirking Roman drawled. He knows exactly who I am. He turned back to her. Sienna, choose. Who do you want? Her breath shuddered. Choose. How was she supposed to choose? Her father's hand tightened on her arm. We're leaving. No, she whispered, shaking her head. She had to know. For the first time, her gaze flickered downward, searching for something, anything, that could give her an answer. Then she saw it. A barely visible scar just behind Serious Roman's ear. Her heart stopped. Roman had told her once, casually over a late-night drink, that he had gotten that scar as a child when he fell off a bike. The other man, smirking Roman, had no scar. Her blood turned to ice. She knew. Her lips parted. She opened her mouth, ready to say his name. But before she could speak, the doors to the cathedral burst open with a violent crash. Armed men flooded in. Gunshots rang out. Screams tore through the air. And the last thing Sienna saw before darkness swallowed her whole was Roman, the real Roman, lunging toward her. Bang. That was the first thing Sienna felt. A dull, throbbing ache pounded in her skull, and the world around her swayed in a blurry haze. She forced her eyes open. The dim glow of a chandelier flickered above her. The scent of leather and expensive cologne filled her senses. She wasn't in the cathedral anymore. She was in a room. A luxurious one. Deep mahogany walls, bookshelves lined with ancient novels, and a grand fireplace crackling in the corner. Heavy silk curtains covered the windows, trapping her in a suffocating warmth. Sienna tried to sit up, but a strong hand pressed against her shoulder. Easy. Her breath hitched. That voice. Smooth. Familiar. Her gaze shot upward, straight into the stormy gray eyes of the man sitting beside her. Roman Sinclair. Or at least one of them. Panic surged through her. She jerked away from his touch, scrambling upright on the velvet couch. Stay away from me. His jaw tightened. Sienna. No, she snapped, her heart racing. Who are you? Which one are you? Silence hung between them. His expression remained unreadable, but something dark flickered in his gaze. Then he exhaled slowly as if accepting an unspoken challenge. I'm your husband. The words slammed into her like a freight train. She went still. What? He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. We got married. The wedding continued. Her stomach flipped violently. No, that's not possible. She struggled to remember, but everything was a blur. The last thing she recalled was the gunshots, the screams, Roman lunging toward her. And then, nothing. Her hands trembled as she stared at him. Tell me the truth, she whispered. Who did I marry? A muscle ticked in his jaw. Me. Her heart pounded. That doesn't answer my question. A shadow of something unreadable passed over his face. Sienna's chest tightened. The scar. The real Roman had a scar behind his ear. Her gaze flickered, searching. But before she could see, he caught her chin gently between his fingers. Looking for something? Her breath caught. He had felt her searching. He knew. Her pulse thudded wildly as his thumb traced her lower lip. Sienna, I need you to trust me. She swallowed hard. I don't know if I can. Something flickered in his eyes. A flash of something real, hurt, longing. Then just as quickly it was gone. I'll prove it to you, he murmured. I'll prove that I'm the man you fell in love with. A knock at the door shattered the moment. Roman, or whoever he was, tensed. Sir, a voice called from the other side. It's Ethan. We need to talk. Sienna's pulse spiked. Ethan. The man she had known since childhood. The man who had been Roman's closest friend for years. If anyone knew the truth, it was him. Roman stood, adjusting his cuffs. Stay here. No, Sienna pushed to her feet. I want to hear what he has to say. A long pause. Then with a heavy sigh Roman nodded. Fine. He crossed the room, unlocking the door. Ethan stepped inside, his expression grim. His blue eyes flicked to Sienna, relief flashing through them for a split second, before his gaze landed on Roman, and turned cold. Sienna stiffened. Something was wrong. Ethan's jaw clenched. We need to talk. Now. Roman studied him for a moment before nodding. Sienna stays. Ethan's lips pressed into a thin line, but he didn't argue. Sienna swallowed, her hands curling into fists. Ethan turned to her, his voice quiet but firm. Sienna, listen to me very carefully. She nodded, barely breathing. Ethan took a slow step forward, his eyes locking onto hers. This man, he said, his voice razor sharp, is not your husband. Silence. A cold shiver crawled down her spine. She turned to Roman, her husband, but his expression didn't change. He didn't look surprised. He just sighed. Then slowly he turned to Ethan, his lips curving into a knowing smile. You always were a terrible liar. Sienna's breath caught. Ethan stiffened. Damn it, Roman. His voice wavered, filled with frustration, maybe even regret. She deserves to know the truth. Roman's smirk faded. His shoulders squared. You think she can handle it? His voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of warning beneath it. Ethan didn't back down. She deserves to choose. Choose. Sienna's stomach twisted. Roman, or whoever he was, turned back to her. And for the first time she saw something raw beneath his carefully controlled exterior. Pain. Longing. Regret. His Adam's apple bobbed as he exhaled deeply. Then finally he spoke. My name, he said, is Damon Sinclair. The room tilted. Sienna's breath caught. No. No, that's impossible. Damon Sinclair was dead. Roman's long-lost twin. The one who had vanished years ago, presumed to have died overseas in a tragic accident. Her pulse pounded. She turned to Ethan for confirmation, but he only looked away. Which meant it was true. The man she had married wasn't Roman. It was his twin. Her knees wobbled, but she refused to let herself fall. Why? Her voice cracked. Why would you lie to me? Damon's gaze darkened. I didn't lie, he said softly. I just let you believe what you wanted to. Her stomach twisted violently. No, she shook her head. You let me think I was marrying Roman. You let me stand at that altar, not knowing the truth. A long silence stretched between them. Then, I did it to protect you. She inhaled sharply. From who? Damon's jaw tightened. The real Roman. Her blood turned to ice. Before she could speak, Ethan stepped in. Sienna, listen to me. Roman isn't the man you think he is. He's dangerous. Her heart pounded. I don't believe you. Damon's eyes softened. You will. Sienna swallowed hard, her entire world spinning out of control. Because no matter how much she wanted to deny it, a part of her knew he was telling the truth. Sienna stood frozen, her heart pounding so violently she swore it would break through her rib cage. Damon Sinclair. Not Roman. Her husband was a lie. The realization sent a sharp, cutting pain through her chest. She had walked down that aisle believing she was marrying one man, only to find out she had been deceived. And now she stood between two men, one she had loved and one she thought she had loved. I don't believe you, she whispered, shaking her head. This has to be some kind of twisted game. Damon, because that's who he was now, not Roman, watched her carefully. I wish it were. Her stomach churned. Then prove it. Prove you're not Roman. Damon's jaw tightened. He said nothing for a moment, and the silence stretched unbearably between them. Then finally he moved. Slowly, deliberately he turned his head. And that's when she saw it. Smooth skin. No scar. Her chest constricted. Her mind screamed at her to deny it, to fight it, but the evidence was right in front of her. The man standing before her, the man she had kissed, the man who had touched her with such devastating intensity, was not her fiancé. Her hands curled into fists at her sides. How could you do this to me? Damon exhaled, his voice heavy with something unreadable. I didn't plan this, Sienna. Don't lie to me. Her voice shook. You stood there and let me marry you. You let me believe that you were safe. Damon cut in, his voice turning sharp. That's what I let you believe. Her breath hitched. Safe? A shiver crawled down her spine. What are you talking about? Damon's expression darkened. Roman is dangerous. Sienna's pulse spiked. That was the second time she'd heard that. First from Ethan. Now from Damon. Her lips parted, her mind desperate to refute it, but a part of her hesitated. Roman was secretive. Roman had always held something back from her, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. And now the brother he was supposed to have lost, his own flesh and blood, had stolen his wedding. What? Sienna swallowed hard. Tell me everything. Damon and Ethan exchanged a glance. Then finally Damon nodded. He turned away, pacing toward the fireplace, running a hand through his hair. 4 years Roman built his empire on ruthless business decisions, some legal, some not. He glanced back at her. But it wasn't just business. He got involved with people, dangerous people. Sienna shivered. She had always known Roman was powerful. She had even heard the rumors, whispers of deals made in the shadows, of people who crossed him disappearing overnight. But she had never wanted to believe them. You're lying, she said, but even to her own ears it sounded weak. Damon's eyes softened. I wish I were. Sienna's breathing grew uneven. And where do you fit into all of this? Damon's expression hardened. Roman thought I was dead. Everyone did. She stiffened. That part of the story was true. Roman had once confided in her, told her about the brother he had lost, the grief he had buried so deeply it turned him cold. But if Damon was alive, why had he stayed hidden? As if sensing her question, Damon exhaled. I was taken, he said quietly. Kidnapped when I was young. I spent years trying to escape, years trying to get back the life that was stolen from me. His gaze darkened. And when I finally returned, I realized the real enemy wasn't the men who had taken me. Sienna's stomach twisted. You're saying it was Roman? Damon's silence was answer enough. Her body turned cold. The man she had loved, the man she had been willing to spend her life with, wasn't just ruthless. He was capable of destroying his own brother. The air in the room grew thick, suffocating. Sienna turned away, hugging her arms around herself. She needed time. She needed space. She needed... A sharp knock on the door shattered the silence. All three of them stiffened. Damon's hand went to his waist, instinctively reaching for a weapon. Sienna's heart pounded. Who was outside? Damon flicked a glance at Ethan, who nodded before moving to open the door. It swung open. And standing there, his face shadowed by the dim light, was Roman. The real one. A chill ran down Sienna's spine. He was different than she remembered. His sharp features were harsher, his jaw locked so tightly she thought it might break. And his eyes, those piercing gray eyes that once held secrets and promises, were now filled with nothing but rage. His gaze flickered over the room, landing first on Ethan, then Damon, then finally, on her. His expression didn't change, but she saw the flicker of something beneath his cold exterior. Something dangerous. His lips curled into a slow, deadly smile. Well, he murmured, I suppose I should be flattered. Sienna's breath hitched. He took a step inside, the air around them turning ice cold. My own brother wanted my life so badly, he stole it. Damon's stance remained firm, unreadable. You don't deserve it. Roman chuckled, low, dark, lethal. And you do. His gaze shifted to Sienna. Tell me, wife, he drawled, have you enjoyed being his? Her throat went dry. She had not been his. She had been deceived. And yet, a part of her ached at his words. Because she had once belonged to him. Even if she hated him now. She lifted her chin, her voice steady. You lied to me. Roman arched a brow. And he didn't? Sienna hesitated. Roman took a slow step closer. I wonder, Sienna, he murmured. Did you ever stop to ask why he took my place? She froze. A warning prickled in her chest. Damon stepped in front of her, blocking Roman's view. She doesn't need to hear this. Roman smirked. No, I think she does. Sienna's pulse thundered. What are you saying? She whispered. Roman's smirk widened. Then he leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm saying, sweetheart, that the man you married didn't just steal my name. Pause. He stole you. Her heart stopped. Roman's eyes gleamed. Ask him, he taunted. Ask him if he knew you were mine before he ever stepped into that church. Silence crashed into the room. Sienna turned slowly, her breath shaking. Damon's expression was unreadable. But she saw it. That flicker of hesitation. That split-second pause. And just like that, she knew. A cold, horrifying realization clawed its way into her chest. Damon hadn't just taken his brother's place. He had wanted her all along. Her stomach twisted violently. Tell me he's lying, she whispered. Damon's jaw clenched. But he said nothing. And that silence shattered her. She had been a game. A prize. First to Roman. And now to Damon. Sienna staggered backward, her vision blurring. Her heart was breaking, piece by piece, and she didn't even know which man had broken it more. Sienna couldn't breathe. The air in the lavish study felt thick, suffocating, pressing in on her from all sides. She had been played. Not just by one man. By two. Her eyes flickered between them. Roman, standing tall and predatory, his smirk laced with malice. And Damon, the man she had unknowingly married, his face taut with something she couldn't quite name. Guilt. Regret. Or worse, love. Her stomach twisted violently. No, she whispered, shaking her head. No, this isn't happening. Roman's smirk deepened. Oh, but it is. Damon stiffened beside her. Sienna. She turned on him so fast he flinched. Don't. Her voice was raw, barely holding together. Don't say my name like you didn't lie to me. Like you didn't? Her breath hitched. Like you didn't steal me. Damon's hands curled into fists. I didn't steal you. His voice was rough, pained. I saved you. She let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Saved me? You married me under a false name, Damon. You stood at that altar and let me believe that you were marrying a monster? Roman cut in smoothly. Her body turned ice cold. Because that's what this all came back to, didn't it? Roman. Damon had taken his place, had wanted to take his place, not just because he wanted to reclaim his stolen life, but because he wanted to protect her. From the man standing in front of them now. Roman took a slow step forward, his eyes gleaming with amusement. You think you're a victim, sweetheart? She flinched at the familiar endearment. His lips curled. You're not. You're just collateral damage. Her stomach twisted. Collateral damage. As if she had never mattered. Her nails dug into her palms, anger rising to the surface, battling the overwhelming ache in her chest. You don't get to act like you're innocent, she shot back. You lied to me too, Roman. You used me. Roman's smirk didn't waver. And yet, you fell for me anyway. Her breath caught. Because he wasn't wrong. She had fallen for him. For the sharp edges of his mind. For the way he always seemed in control, always 5 steps ahead of everyone else. For the way he looked at her, even now, as if she were something rare. Something he had lost. Her heart pounded. Because now Damon looked at her that way too. She backed away, pressing a hand to her temple. I can't do this. Damon stepped forward instantly. Sienna. Roman's smirk flickered. Sienna turned, panic bubbling in her chest. I need to think. I need to get out of here. But before she could move, Roman spoke. You leave, he said coolly, and you'll never know the truth. She froze. Silence stretched between them. Slowly she turned back around. What? Roman arched a brow. Did you really think Damon was the only one lying to you? Her pulse spiked. Damon tensed beside her. Roman. Roman ignored him. His gaze stayed locked on hers. There's something you don't know, he murmured. Something about why I was so desperate to marry you. Sienna's breath stilled. Because she had wondered. Roman had never struck her as the kind of man to believe in love. And yet he had pursued her. Courted her. Proposed to her. What? Her stomach churned. What are you saying? Roman tilted his head. That maybe you weren't just some innocent bride in all of this. Her blood ran cold. Damon stepped between them. Don't listen to him. Roman smirked. Why not? Afraid she'll finally see the whole picture? Damon's body went rigid. Sienna took a shaky step back. Her voice wavered. I don't know who to believe. Roman's smirk widened. Damon flinched. And Sienna realized she had fallen for the wrong man. She had fallen for both of them. And now she didn't know if she could trust either. Later that night, Sienna sat by the large bedroom window, her fingers curled around a glass of untouched wine. The estate was silent now, but the storm inside her wouldn't settle. She had locked the door behind her. She didn't want to see either of them. But as the hours stretched on, she knew she wouldn't be left alone for long. And she was right. A soft knock sounded. She didn't move. Go away. Pause. Then. I can't. Damon. Her chest ached. She turned slowly, her throat tight. What do you want? He hesitated. Then finally he stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Then Damon exhaled. I never wanted to hurt you. She swallowed hard. But you did. His jaw clenched. I know. Silence. She studied him, his tousled dark hair, his stormy gray eyes, so much like Roman's but somehow softer, more tortured. And that was the problem, wasn't it? Because Damon wasn't Roman. He never had been. And yet, a part of her had wanted him anyway. Even now, her pulse skittered at his presence. Even now, she remembered the way he had touched her, before she knew who he truly was. She sucked in a sharp breath. Did you ever love me? The question stunned him. His expression cracked for a split second, his armor slipping just enough for her to see the truth. Yes, he said quietly. I did. Her heart clenched. Did. Past tense. She looked away. You should go. A beat of silence. Then. You're right, he murmured. Her breath hitched as he stepped closer, his scent, wood smoke and something darkly intoxicating, wrapping around her. You should hate me, he whispered. But tell me. He lifted a hand, brushing his knuckles along her jaw. Her pulse stopped. Do you? She sucked in a breath. Because the truth, the terrifying, awful truth, was that she didn't know the answer. And as Damon's lips brushed against hers, soft and searching, she knew she was making a mistake. But she couldn't stop herself from making it anyway. Sienna knew this was a mistake. But when Damon's lips brushed against hers, soft and searching, she didn't pull away. She should have. But she didn't. His hands traced down her arms, slow and reverent, as if memorizing the feel of her. His touch sent shivers down her spine, a warmth curling low in her stomach, igniting something dangerous, something she had tried so hard to suppress. Because she had loved Roman. Hadn't she? Damon's lips parted against hers, a soft, unspoken plea lingering between them. His breath was ragged, his body taut with restraint. Sienna, he murmured against her mouth. Tell me to stop. But she didn't. Because deep down, past the betrayal, past the lies, she wanted this. She wanted him. Her fingers tangled in his hair, tugging him closer, and with that single invitation, his control snapped. A growl rumbled from his chest as he lifted her effortlessly, pressing her against the cool glass of the window. The heat of his body against hers, the tension coiled between them, it all crashed down at once. His lips moved hungrily, dragging down her throat, his fingers gripping her waist with a possessiveness that sent her pulse skyrocketing. She gasped. Damon. He exhaled sharply, his forehead pressing against hers. Say it again. Her breath hitched. Say my name, Sienna. She swallowed hard, her body betraying her, arching into his touch. Damon. His grip tightened. Mine. Her heart thundered. She should fight this. She should stop this. But when his mouth found hers again, when his hands traced fire along her skin, she didn't just surrender. She craved it. Her fingers fumbled with the buttons of his shirt, her breathing uneven as she pushed it from his shoulders. And God, his body. She had thought Roman was all sharp lines and control. But Damon was raw, sculpted with tension and years of pain. She traced a scar along his ribs, her voice barely above a whisper. What happened to you? His jaw clenched. Not tonight. Because tonight wasn't about the past. Tonight was about them. And when he kissed her again, slower this time, deeper, everything else disappeared. The past. The lies. The war between him and Roman. All that was left was fire. And it consumed them both. Sienna lay tangled in the sheets, her skin still flushed, her heart still pounding. Damon's arm was wrapped around her waist, his breathing slow and steady against her neck. She had never felt so wrecked. And yet she had never felt so alive. Her fingers trailed absently over his forearm, tracing the lines of muscle, the faint scars that told stories she didn't know yet. For the first time in weeks she felt safe. But safety was an illusion. Because when the knock came at the door, sharp, demanding, she knew. Roman. Damon stirred beside her, his body instantly alert. Don't answer it. But she had to. Because this wasn't just about them. This was about everything. Carefully, she slipped from the bed, wrapping the silk sheet around her body, ignoring the delicious ache that still lingered in her limbs. Damon sat up, watching her with dark, stormy eyes. Sienna. She didn't look back. She couldn't. She crossed the room, unlocking the door, and as it swung open, her breath caught. Roman stood there, his gaze sweeping over her. Her tousled hair, the flush on her skin, the marks Damon had left on her. His lips pressed into a thin line. For the first time there was no smirk. Just silence. Cold. Tense. Unforgiving. Sienna's throat tightened. Roman. His jaw ticked. So it's him then. Her heart clenched. Because that wasn't a question. Damon's voice cut through the air behind her. It was never you. Roman's gaze snapped to him, fury flashing in his storm-gray eyes. Sienna stepped between them before the tension could erupt into something worse. Stop. Roman's expression didn't change. You really think this ends here, sweetheart? His voice was quiet. Lethal. A shiver crawled down her spine. Damon stepped closer, his hand grazing the small of her back, a silent claim. She's mine now. Roman's eyes darkened. Then, slowly, his lips curled into something dangerous. We'll see about that. He turned on his heel and walked away, his presence lingering in the air long after he disappeared down the hallway. Sienna's stomach twisted. Because she knew. This wasn't over. Sienna sat on the terrace of Damon's private estate, staring at the vast ocean stretching before her. It should have felt peaceful. But her mind was anything but at peace. Roman hadn't tried to contact her. Not yet. But he would. Because men like Roman Sinclair didn't lose. A pair of strong arms wrapped around her from behind, pulling her into warmth. You're thinking too much. She leaned into Damon's touch, closing her eyes. I don't know how to stop. His lips brushed against her temple. Then let me help. She exhaled, turning to face him. His gaze was soft, fierce, filled with something real. And for the first time she allowed herself to believe that maybe she had finally made the right choice. Maybe Damon Sinclair was the one who had truly owned her heart all along. She cupped his face, tracing the stubble along his jaw, feeling the way his breath hitched at her touch. I love you, she whispered. The words were fragile, terrifying, but they were true. Damon's eyes darkened, his fingers tightening around her waist. Then without a word he kissed her. And this time there was no hesitation. No doubt. Just them. And as their bodies tangled beneath the moonlight, Sienna knew. She had finally found where she belonged. 1 month later. Sienna sighed as she slipped into the warm embrace of Damon's arms, her silk robe barely clinging to her skin. You're insatiable, she murmured, pressing a kiss to his jaw. Damon smirked. Only when it comes to you. She laughed softly, letting herself melt into him. The past month had been unexpected. They had left the city, started a new life, together. And yet, a shadow still lingered. Roman. He had disappeared after that night, but she knew better than to believe he was truly gone. Damon's grip tightened. You're thinking about him. She sighed. A little. Damon turned her in his arms, tilting her chin up. He's in the past, Sienna. His gaze was fire and steel. And I'm your future. Her chest swelled. She knew he was right. But deep down she also knew. Roman Sinclair wasn't finished with them yet. And when he returned, this time she would be ready.